Thank you so much for joining us today for the 2023 State DOT webinar. My name is Reed Kottman, and I'm joined by Courtney Springer. If you have any questions as we go through the presentation, like Lori said, please feel free to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. Both Courtney and I will be answering those as we go along. Quick disclaimer, the contents of this presentation are intended to provide clarity regarding the existing requirements of the FTA and NTD. Please always feel free to refer to the statutes and regulations for the requirements. Also, a quick note, for those of you who attended the subrecipient webinar last week, this presentation contains very similar material. With that being said, if you would like to stick around, please feel free to. The goal of the webinar is to identify changes for the upcoming 2023 report year, to provide an overview of NTD reporting requirements, and to apply those new requirements to the system. Here's the agenda for this afternoon. First, we will do a quick overview of the NTD. Then we will move on to important changes and clarifications for the 2023 report year. Next, we will review the fundamentals of NTD reporting. We will discuss how to get started in this reporting system, and then move on to how to kick off and complete the annual report, including some common reporting challenges. Lastly, we will review how to submit your report, the closeout, and the validation process. Here's the contact information for the National Transit Database. If you encounter any technical issues with the system, you may contact the FTA IT Help Desk seen here on the screen. If you need any assistance in accessing our published data products, please feel free to email our help desk between 8 a.m. and 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Courtney and I's contact information is listed here. Please reach out to us if you have any questions about this presentation. For any reporting or validation questions, please contact your assigned analyst. If you are unsure of who your analyst is, please feel free to email us and we will put you in contact with whoever is assigned as your analyst for report year 2023. In addition to our contact information, we also want to provide the FTA program contacts here, Chelsea Champlin and Thomas Coleman. The key reference documents for NTD reporting are located mostly here. These will include the policy manual, which we should have an updated copy available soon, the glossary, user guide, and the transit asset management guidebooks. All right, first we will begin a quick overview of the National Transit Database. What is the National Transit Database, or NTD? NTD was established to be the nation's primary source for information and statistics on all public transit modes in the United States. It's a source of data for performance measurement benchmarking, as well as research. Recipients and subrecipients of Chapter 53 funds report to the NTD. Subrecipients of State 5311 funds report data through their state's report. These subrecipients may include those that have received funding in the past and are still required to report based on continuing grant requirements, as well as some who report voluntarily that wish to receive Chapter 5311 funds in the future. 5311 recipients and subrecipients are required to report due to grant requirements, as stated here from the associated legislation. NTD data is due on the following dates: October 31st, January 31st, and April 30th, depending on your agency's fiscal year end. These deadlines are closely monitored, and if you have any questions on when to report, please reach out to your assigned NTD analyst. We will now go into the changes and clarifications for report year 2023 that may affect your NTD report. First, we have the WE20 weekly reference reporting forms. A sample of reporters were selected to submit these monthly submissions of data that represent a pre-selected week of service. This requirement only applies to selected agencies, so if your agency was not selected, you may disregard this requirement. The agencies selected for the sample have already been notified by their NTD analyst and have already submitted data. The reference weeks for the remainder of the 2023 calendar year can be seen on this slide. The next change for report year 2023 is the General Feed Specification, or GTFS, fixed route modes. Agencies who operate fixed route modes will be asked to submit GTFS links in report year 2023. The GTFS link submitted to the NTD must be static and must not include any password protection. In other words, the link should be publicly accessible. After the initial submission of the GTFS links in report year 2023, agencies will be asked to certify their links are up to date year to year. If there are any changes to the fixed route service, the GTFS link should be updated accordingly. The GTFS link should be uploaded via the new P50 form found in the Related Actions tab of your agency's profile page. If submitting a GTFS link on behalf of their subrecipients, states must submit at least one unique link or compressed file per NTD ID or submit multiple links. All GTFS links submitted to the NTD must contain agency, stops, routes, trips, stop times, and calendar or calendar dates text files. Feed info and shape files are optional, but are recommended. Please ensure that all links are public and accessible. The Rural Transit Assistance Program, or RTAP, is a great resource for assistance with creating a GTFS feed. We've included a link to their GTFS builder here on the slide. RTAP also offers live support for GTFS on Thursdays between 1 and 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time. The B15 form is new for report year 2023. The B15 will capture geospatial data for any demand response modes that are operated. If the subrecipient agency operates multiple demand response modes, such as purchase transportation demand response and directly operated demand response, they will be asked to complete a B15 form for each. Courtney will provide more detail on the B15 form in the annual report section of this presentation. The SNS 60 form is also new for report year 2023. This form will replace the safety section that had previously been reported on the RR20 form. The SNS 60 form will capture more detailed data related to safety and security events. Just like the B15 form, Courtney will provide more detail on the SNS 60 form and the data it collects in the annual report section. Starting in report year 2023, agencies will be asked to include fuel types for the revenue vehicles on the existing A30 form. Once reported, this data will carry over from year to year, just as other revenue vehicle data does. In report year 2023, agencies will need to include an emergency contact on their P10 form. The emergency contact does not need to be an existing NTD user and should be a specific individual. Additionally, this contact should be someone from the subrecipient agency, not from the state. FTA will use the emergency contact's information to establish contact with the agency in the event of an emergency situation. Once the emergency contact's information has been entered, agencies will recertify or update the information in each consecutive report year. Now we will review NTD fundamentals, where we will cover modes, types of service, revenue service definitions, and an overview of financial information. When reporting to the NTD, service must be public. Once that is determined, the mode comes next. Here on this slide are the most common nodes in the rural module: demand response and bus. Bus service is defined as a vehicle powered by a motor and containing fuel within. It can include services that have route deviation, point deviation, or deviated fixed route. Demand response service is defined as a service scheduled in response to calls from passengers, such as a dial-a-ride. Another popular mode in the rural module is the commuter bus mode. We receive many questions on what is and what is not considered commuter bus service versus regular bus service. Clarify, commuter bus operates with more than 5 miles of closed-door service, and the same type of vehicles are consistently operated on the service. If you think you have both bus and commuter bus service, please keep in mind that the vehicles shouldn't be used between the services on the same day. This also applies to the driver's work assignments, which are typically separate. If your subrecipient is currently reporting both commuter bus and bus service, and you believe that they may only need to report one mode, please contact your analyst for assistance, and we can help determine how it should be reported and provide the steps on how to change this in the reporting system if appropriate. The next topic we'll cover is the types of service. Currently in NTD, there are two main types of service: directly operated and purchased transportation. Directly operated is when the service is operated by the agency and uses the agency's own employees. Purchased transportation is when the vehicles are operated by the seller's employees, the service is branded as the buyer's, and the buyer is paying the full cost of the service. Within purchased transportation, there is TX for services operated by a taxi provider and TN for services operated by a transportation network company, or TNC. Services operated by a contractor that is neither a taxi provider nor a TNC, the type would service would remain PT, or purchased transportation. After the mode and type of service is determined, the next question is, what data should you be collecting for these services? Here are some of the data points, as well as the abbreviations that are used throughout this presentation and on the report. These data points are collected on a per mode and type of service basis, except for sponsored unlinked passenger trips, which are only collected for demand response mode types. These are common acronyms that you will see throughout NTD materials. We will first cover vehicle revenue miles, VRM, and vehicle revenue hours, VRH. These are miles and hours accrued while a vehicle is in revenue service. Revenue service is defined as when the vehicles are transporting passengers or are able to transport passengers. This includes layover and recovery time. Revenue service does not include deadhead, driver training, school bus or charter services, and vehicle maintenance. As mentioned on the previous slide, deadhead is not reported in your revenue service. This includes leaving or returning to the garage or yard facility, changing routes, or when there is no expectation of carrying passengers. There are detailed tables found within the NTD policy manual, which provide further examples of what is and what is not considered revenue service. We'll be reviewing these tables in a couple of slides. A common question we receive is whether or not the service provided under meal delivery is reportable. If the meal delivery does not include the active transport of passengers, the service data should not be reported. If you're using 5311 funding for the meal delivery, the funding would be reported. However, the amount spent on the meal delivery service would not be reported under the mode's expenses. This will mean a mismatch between your funding and mode expenses on your RR20 form. FTA defines public transportation as open to the general public. Although the NTD excludes services that are only open to specific groups of people, the NTD does accept transportation services for segments of the general population defined by age, disability, or low income. Additionally, FTA defines public transportation as being shared ride, which means that rides can be shared by passengers with no affiliation to one another. Here's an example for the demand response mode of what is and what is not considered revenue service. Please note that the time and miles from when the vehicle is dispatched from the garage to the pickup of a passenger are not considered revenue service until they reach the pickup point. At the end of the example, the time and miles from the last drop-off back to the dispatching point are also not considered revenue service. Building on the previous slide, this table explains what is and what is not considered revenue service for the bus mode. Again, from the garage to the first stop of the route is not considered revenue service, and from the last drop-off point back to the garage is also not revenue service. Both of these tables are found in the policy manual and may be helpful to pass along to your subrecipients if they have questions as to what to report for revenue service. FTA requires all public transportation modes to provide shared rides in order to be reportable to the NTD. However, in the case of an emergency, agencies may still report public transportation modes if ride sharing is temporarily suspended as long as the service still meets the other public transportation requirements. If a situation similar to this occurs, please contact your analyst. Trip brokering comes up from time to time in the rural module. For subrecipients that report trip brokered service, please make sure to include all the resulting data from the trip, including the miles, hours, and passengers. Additionally, the revenue received should be reported as organization paid fares. Please keep in mind that if the trip is client specific, it is not considered public transportation and should not be reported. Unlinked passenger trips, or UPT, should represent the number of passenger boardings during the reporting period. Passengers are counted each time they board the vehicle, no matter how many vehicles they use from their origin to their destination. When reporting unlinked passenger trips, please include all passengers. These passengers are usually classified as regular or sponsored. When reporting UPT on the RR20 form, this should be the total number of passenger trips, both regular and sponsored. For demand response, you will report sponsored trips as a subset of the total UPT. Sponsored trips are trips that are paid for in full or in part by a third party. These may be part of a coordinated human services transportation plan. Common sponsors are the VA, Medicaid, and assisted living centers. As mentioned on the last slide, sponsored UPT should be reported as a subset of the total unlinked passenger trips for all demand response modes reported. Vehicles operated in maximum service, or VOMs, are the number of revenue vehicles an agency operates to meet the annual maximum service requirement. VOMs are counted during the peak season of the year on the busiest day, but you will want to exclude atypical days or special events. This count should include any volunteer vehicles that were used in revenue service during maximum service. This shouldn't be the amount of active vehicles your agency has in service, but rather how many vehicles are used on the road at once during peak service during the fiscal year. Another important definition is accrual accounting. NTD reporting requirements for financial data follow generally accepted accounting principles, or GAAP, and accrual accounting. If there are conflicts between GAAP and NTD reporting instructions and requirements, NTD rules are to be followed. In accrual accounting, the revenue is recorded when earned, regardless of when payment is received, and expenses are recorded when the liability occurs, regardless of when the payment is made. Please see the example here and in the policy manual for more detail. When reporting data to the NTD, the subrecipient will report the funding spent, not the amount the agency was awarded. Here on the slide is an example. If the agency was awarded $275,000, but only spent $178,000, they would report the $178,000 instead of the $275,000 that was awarded to them. Next, we will review the types of expenses. First is operating expenses. Operating expenses are the day-to-day expenses that a transit agency incurs. These may be for operating and maintaining vehicles, maintaining other equipment, planning costs, admin costs, as well as other examples seen here on the slide. Capital expenses are those related to the purchase of equipment. Equipment means an article of non-expendable personal property having a useful life of more than 1 year. The equipment will have an acquisition cost, which equals a lesser of the capitalization level established by the government unit for financial statement purposes, or $5,000 as determined by FTA. Lastly, we will cover capital assistance spent on operations. This is when capital funding is spent on activities that are normally considered operating, such as preventative maintenance and the purchase of tires. Please make sure to break this out of your other operating funding, as this has a different match percentage. There's a separate field for this on the RR20 form for certain funding sources, such as 5311, like seen here on the slide. For operating expenses, if an agency has more than 2 modes, the operating costs will be broken out between the modes based on the direct and shared expenses. Once the direct expenses for each mode are identified and broken out, the remaining shared expenses may be calculated between the modes based on a cost allocation method. Please note that this is only acceptable for shared expenses. and should not be used for direct expenses. There should be some expenses that are direct to each mode. Here's a quick overview of the TAM rule. Those that receive Chapter 53 funds and either own, operate, or manage capital assets used in the provision of public transportation services are required to report data for their assets. For recipients of 5310B1D, if they do not provide public transit services, they are not required to report under the TAM rule. With regards to how the data is reported, for those in the sponsored state DOT plan, you will report the assets associated with the plan on the individual subrecipient's package. However, the targets and narrative report will come from the state DOT forms. You as the state may have Tier 2 participants as part of your plan, and these will mostly consist of 5311, 5310, and small urban providers. You will report data on behalf of your managed participants, such as the 5311 and 5310 asset-only providers, while the urban direct reporters will submit their own asset data on their own report. This data will be pulled into the metrics on your A90, and you, as the state DOT, will be able to view their asset forms, but not edit them. Data submission will work as it has previously, with the state submitting one report on behalf of all its managed subrecipients and participants. Capital responsibility is important to understand in order to determine how assets should be reported to the NTD. Please see the list here to determine whether or not an agency has direct capital responsibility for an asset. As a note for the third bullet point, an infrastructure asset itemized as a capital line item in the budget does not necessarily mean an agency has direct capital responsibility. An agency must also have management or oversight responsibilities for the line item project. In addition, performing minimal preventative maintenance work does not necessarily indicate direct capital responsibility. The narrative report is due every year for each agency that is submitting a TAM plan. This will be either states that are group plan sponsors or individual agencies that complete their own TAM plan. The report may include any changes in the transit system that may affect progress towards their goals and how they determine their targets. The report will be uploaded to the bottom of the A90 form. This ends our overview of NTD fundamentals. Next, we will review the NTD interface and account user management. The NTD homepage is found at www.transit.dot.gov/NTD. This is where the data products, policy manuals, and clickable link to log into the reporting system are housed. Once the login link is selected from the website, you will click on the blue link that reads, "If you are a non-FTA user, click this link to log in." From there, it will prompt you to log into login.gov. Please make sure that your login.gov account is set up with the same email address that you've been using for NTD reporting. If you are unsure of what email that is, please contact your assigned analyst. In addition to the password you set up for your login.gov account, you will need to set up at least one secondary authentication method. There are multiple options for secondary authentication, which are all shown here. After logging in, all users will land on the home page. Here, you'll select the NTD box in order to access your account. If you would like to automatically go into the NTD site every time you log in, you can click on the star at the top right of the NTD box, and this will save your preference. The NTD homepage allows users to directly access their NTD report from the front page. Next, on the title ribbon is the Tasks tab. This section houses your important tasks, such as the report year kickoff, incomplete forms, or incomplete submissions. To access your report packages, you will want to ensure that you are first on the homepage. From here, you will select the Annual tab, and it will populate any open NTD reports for your agency. Here, you will see the state DOT package, as well as the individual subrecipient packages. You can access the forms one of two ways. You can either click on the NTD ID with the folder icon on the left, which will direct you to the report package summary page, which is where you can access the list of your subrecipient reports. This route will also allow you to access related actions for your report package. If you would like to only edit the forms, you can click on the pencil icon on the right side of the page, and the system will take you directly to the clickable list of forms to edit. To access the reporter profiles, you will still want to ensure that you are on the home page or tab. Instead of clicking on the annual, you will click on Profile, and a list of your agency profiles will load. The profile is where you will edit your mode, agency basic information, as well as view other users from your agency. To view the individual forms, you will click on the pencil icon on the right side of the page, which will allow you to access the P10, P20, P30, and the new P50. To access other profile options, click on the NTD ID folder icon on the left. Once you click on the NTD ID folder icon on the left, you will see the profile summary page. From here, you can go through related actions to edit the P forms. The new emergency contact information will be located within the P10 form, as seen in this screenshot. Please enter this information for report year 2023. Next is the e-file library. This is where you can filter through communications from prior years, as well as this report year. For example, you may review closeout letters through this tab. The form library is where you can see the data from previous years that has been submitted to the NTD. You can use the drop-down menu to select the package, and then the link in blue for whichever form you'd like to view. This will download a file in HTML format. In addition to viewing the forms, under the Related Actions tab of the profile, you'll be able to print the previous year's report packages in full rather than form by form. Other actions you can complete is viewing and editing profile forms, which are the P10 basic information form, the P20 mode form, the P30 to review the users for your agency, and the P50, which houses the new GTFS specification links. Located at the bottom of the Related Actions tab, you can see actions for both printing the annual report package, as well as printing subrecipient report packages. Please note that the print annual package option will only include the state's forms, not the subrecipient's forms. If you choose to print your annual package, you will be taken to a new page where you will click refresh until the link comes up for you to download the file. Once the file is ready and refresh is clicked, you will be redirected to the previous page. Here on the slide, you can see near the red arrow, the downloadable file link will appear after it populates. Lastly, we will cover the users and user management. To access the system, you will first need to be a user. To add users, each agency must have a user manager. A user manager may edit and add other users and may also fill NTD roles such as CEO and NTD contact. The most important users to have on your account will be the CEO and NTD contact. The CEO will be the director or CEO of the agency and will be the one submitting the original submission of the report. The NTD contact will be the main point of contact for the analyst to reach out to. After the first submission, the NTD contact may submit any subsequent revisions if needed. Agencies may have an unlimited number of editors and viewers, but there can only be one CEO and NTD contact. If you are already a user in the system and need to unlock your account, there are two different ways to complete this. You can unlock your own account by answering your security questions, which we'll go over in the next slide, or you can submit an unlock request. If you submit an unlock request, the request will go to the user managers on your agency's profile. If you are a user manager, it will either go to another user manager if you have one, or to the NTD team for processing. It is important to note that even if you are locked out of the system, you can still log into the NTD system. However, the report forms will be unavailable until your account is unlocked. As mentioned, if you've set up your security questions beforehand, you will be able to unlock yourself. Set up your questions, go to the top right corner of your screen after logging in and select Profile, and then Related Actions, and then Manage Security Questions. From there, you'll be able to follow the steps provided to set them up. Let's go over what self-reporting means for subrecipients. If you grant access to your subrecipients to be self-reporting, they will have the ability to edit data, save forms, and respond to validation questions. Self-reporting is completely optional and at the state's discretion. When this access is granted, the subrecipient will continue to reach out to the state for technical assistance and reporting questions. If the state has additional questions, they will reach out to their assigned analyst on the NTD team. If you do choose for your subrecipients to be self-reporting, you would need to ensure that the agency's users have access to the NTD reporting system. All user management for self-reporting subrecipients should be handled by the state's user managers. Please keep in mind that all correspondence should go through the state before the analyst. All right, now we're going to jump into the first step of reporting, the report year kickoff. Start, the CEO delegate, and the NTD contact will all have access to the task after the state's fiscal year has ended. One of these users will select the task from the My Tasks tab, then click on Accept and Proceed. The first step is to verify your agency's users. Please review this information and ask your agency's user manager to update what is necessary after the kickoff is completed. As a reminder, only the user manager has the ability to remove or add users from the report. After selecting Continue on the previous page, you will be asked to confirm the subrecipients for report year 2023. You will be able to review the list from your 2022 report and either add or remove subrecipients if needed. If you need to add subrecipients for report year 2023, you can do so on this page. If they are existing reporters, you can search, select, and add them to the grid of subrecipients. Just note, to launch the search, please be sure to select the search button. Keep in mind that the search is automatically contained within your state. So if they have an address that's outside of the state, then you will need to open the states column drop-down menu and remove the filter. Alternatively, if you know which state they are in, you can select it from the list. If you are adding a brand new reporter, you will input their information at the bottom of the page. You will need to enter at least the reporter's name and state. If the agency's unique NTD ID is added, the agency's information will populate automatically. If you do not have this information when you kick off, you may add and remove the subrecipients later on through the state's package under Related Actions and Manage Subrecipients. After adding and removing any subrecipients, you will assign their subrecipient type. The type for existing subrecipients is preloaded from the information from the prior year, but new subrecipients will need to have their type selected from the drop-down menu. The types are Rural General Public Transit, RGPT, Asset Only, Urban or Tribal subrecipients, and Intercity Bus. Next, you will review which of the subrecipients are participants in the state TAM plan. Urban or tribal subrecipients are not selectable from the state's package, as they will select the state during their own kickoff. And intercity bus subrecipient types are not part of TAM requirements. The state will be able to choose whether RGPT types are in the TAM plan, while the asset-only subrecipients will be automatically chosen as participants. After selecting Continue on the previous page, you will be able to select which of your subrecipients will report their own data. This can be all, some, or none of your subrecipients. These designations do not carry over from year to year and will be left blank as not self-reporting if you just select Continue. The last step is clicking Continue and then OK. After you click OK, you will be notified that the report year kickoff is being completed and your report forms are generating. This could take some time as the packages are populating one by one. Any new subrecipients created during the kickoff will produce a task for the analyst to review and will not show up in your report package immediately. Your analyst may reach out to you upon receiving that task for more information. After your kickoff is complete and your forms have populated in the system, you may begin to fill out the data. With that being said, I'm going to hand it over to Courtney to walk you through the NTD package forms and the validation process.
All right, thank you, Reed. Reed, if you don't mind ending your screen share, I will take over controlling the slide deck. Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, great. So good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Courtney Springer. And as Reed said, I will be taking us through how to complete the annual report for 2023. So here's a quick refresher on the rural general public transit subrecipient type, as well as a list of the annual report forms. If you completed this report last year, this list may be familiar to you, but you will notice that there are two new forms included in this list: the B15 Geographic Area Coverage form and the SNS 60 Safety Data form. We will cover each of these forms in more detail in the upcoming sections. Here's a quick refresher on the definition of asset-only subrecipient. So these agencies do not receive 5307 or 5311 funds, but do receive other Chapter 53 funding, such as 5310 funds, and they own, operate, or manage capital assets used in public transit services. These subrecipient types submit abbreviated report packages. They do not report any service or financial data to the NTD, and they only report the identification and asset forms listed here, as well as the new SNS 60. Next are intercity bus subrecipients, which are typically private for-profit agencies that operate regularly scheduled bus service with limited stops between two urbanized areas or UZAs, connect rural areas to UZAs, or have the capacity for transporting luggage. These subrecipient types submit even more abbreviated report packages than asset subrecipients. They do not report asset data to the NTD, and they only report their Section 5311 funding, as well as their 5311 funded vehicle revenue miles and unlinked passenger trips. If a route is only partially funded with 5311 funds, you should report all of the VRM and UPT for that route. Finally, we have our urban or tribal subrecipients. These agencies report directly to the NTD and submit their own report packages independently, but also receive 5311 funds from the state. So these subrecipient types report just a summary of their 5311 funding awarded by the state. To access your report, navigate to the NTD homepage and ensure the annual tab is open, and then select either the state's report package link or the link for an individual subrecipient's report package to begin. And for this example, we'll begin by looking at the state DOT's report package. From the report package summary view, which we're seeing here, select the Annual Forms button in the top right-hand corner as a shortcut to open the state-specific forms, which are the A90 and RU30 forms. You may also select the Subrecipient Reports tab towards the top of the screen, which will take you to your subrecipient grid. This is a view of the subrecipient grid. Select the package for the subrecipient whose report you want to work on. You can also sort this table by clicking on any of the column headers, such as selecting open issues to sort the subrecipient list based on who has outstanding validation issues. From the Related Actions tab of the state report, you can also click on Annual Forms to open the state's list of editable annual forms. Once the list of forms is open, select the hyperlinked form name to begin. So we will start by reviewing the report forms for a rural general public transit or RGPT subrecipient, and then we will cover the state-specific forms towards the end. So the first subrecipient form we will review is the basic information or B10 form. So if you completed an annual NTD report for this subrecipient last year, the organization type you selected will carry over into this year's form. You may update this selection if needed by using the dropdown to select the agency's organization type. Please also enter the fiscal year end date that corresponds to the 12-month period in which you are reporting their 2023 data. So please note that this may be different from the state DOT's fiscal year period. The auxiliary sections are typically rare for rural agencies, so please do not complete this section without discussing it first with your validation analyst. And when you have completed this form, select Save and Validate. Next, we will discuss the new Geographic Area Coverage B15 form. As a reminder, this form will only appear in a subrecipient's report if they operate a demand response or DR mode. For each demand response mode and type of service combination, you will respond to 10 questions in this form, and the questions will be dynamic based on your selections to previous questions. We will review each of the 10 questions through screenshots of this report form. Question 1 asks if the subrecipient serves residents in another state besides your state. So you select yes or no. Question 2 allows you to select the counties that the agency serves, either in whole or in part. So you should start by selecting add, after which you can choose your state and report the counties. Question 3 allows you to select the census places that are served in these counties. And the Census Bureau's TigerWeb application allows you to view census designated places within your county or counties selected. So we do encourage you to review this resource. You can then select the service level by indicating whether the census places are wholly served or partially served. Question 4 asks if any portion of this service is intended to meet the Americans with Disabilities Act or ADA complementary paratransit requirements for a fixed route mode. Select yes or no. If you select yes, question 5 asks if the service area is limited to this particular agency's NTD ID. So if it is, select yes. But if the ADA service serves other NTD reporters, select no. And if you do select no, you should search for and then select all other NTD IDs that the ADA service covers. Question 6 asks if you have different passenger eligibility requirements or different terms and conditions of service. Select yes or no. Question 7 asks which days per week you operate, for which you should select the applicable checkboxes. And when you are done, select Create Days of the Week on the right-hand side of this page, which will then populate question 8. For question 8, you will report the service begin and end time for each day. You'll also answer some basic questions about these services as seen in the column headers under question 8 shown in this screenshot. If you have any questions about these specific items, please contact your validation analyst. Question 9 asks for the minimum advanced reservation time for this service. Enter the numeric minimum and then indicate whether that number corresponds to hours or days. And finally, question 10 asks for the fare charged for this service. You should not include donations in this field. We do understand that this is a new form, so again, we encourage you to contact your validation analyst if you have any questions about these reporting requirements. Next, we will discuss the A10 Stations and Maintenance Facilities form. A10 captures the type and number of maintenance facilities the subrecipient utilizes for public transit. Report facilities based on the ownership types for those facilities. So whether they are owned by the reporting agency, leased from another public agency, or leased from a private entity. The definition of maintenance facility is a garage or building where mechanics perform routine maintenance and repairs and typically serve as operating garages. Please note that you should not include bus barns in this count, nor should you include any type of third-party facility where you might bring your vehicles for repairs, such as a Jiffy Lube. If one facility is shared by 2 or more modes, you should report an allocated share between the applicable modes. This could be based on any data point that indicates how much of the facility is used per mode, but one of the more common approaches is to allocate the facility based on the number of vehicles it services. So to look at an example, let's say an agency owns one maintenance facility and operates both a demand response service and a fixed route bus service. And both modes use this maintenance facility, and the agency owns 20 vehicles in total. The demand response mode runs 15 vehicles, and the bus mode runs 5 vehicles. In this example, we would expect to see 0.75 facilities reported in the demand response A10 form, and 0.25 facilities reported in the bus A10 form. Please ensure that the total number of facilities that you report across all A10 forms comes to a whole number. Next, we will discuss the Transit Asset Management Facilities Inventory A15 form. The A15 form collects basic information on facilities that the subrecipient uses to supply public transit service. On this form, you should report administrative and maintenance facilities for which the agency has capital responsibility. You should also report all passenger and parking facilities that the agency uses in public transit service, regardless of who has capital responsibility for those facilities. Please note that if you report a maintenance facility as owned on the A10 form, we would generally expect that facility to appear on the A15 form as well, as long as the agency's transit use for that facility is greater than incidental. To complete this form, select the Add New button followed by Add Facility. This will allow you to begin entering data for that facility. And you will complete 3 sections per facility entry. So that's update facility information, update condition assessment, and update address. Because of the new reporting requirements for 2023, we will not be able to dedicate time to going over each of these form sections, but we do encourage you to review the NTD policy manual or contact your analyst if you have any questions about any specific report fields or definitions in this form. Your existing facility information will pre-populate from the prior year, so you will only need to add new facilities as needed or update the information for existing facilities as needed. If the subrecipient does not have any reportable facilities, please select the No Data to Report checkbox prior to saving this form. Next, we will review the Revenue Vehicle Inventory A30 form. If you completed this form last year, your data from report year 2022 will pre-populate, which again means you will only need to add new fleets or edit existing fleets as needed. You can enter new fleets by selecting the Add New Fleet button, or you can edit an existing fleet by selecting the RVI ID link for that fleet towards the left of the table. When adding a new fleet, the first section you will see is basic information. You should complete all required fields for this fleet, which are marked with asterisks. The next section is vehicle information. Again, complete all required fields in this section. Please note that a new field, fuel type, will be required starting in report year 2023. You should select the fleet's fuel type from a drop-down menu. Please complete this field for all new and existing fleets this report year. Transit agencies must report the number of active vehicles in each fleet as of the end of their fiscal year. Active vehicles represent the number of vehicles that provide regular service and includes spare vehicles. Inactive vehicles may include any of the following: vehicles that are awaiting sale or disposal, vehicles that are in storage or are part of an FTA-approved emergency contingency plan, or vehicles that are out for major repairs. As a quick reporting reminder, please remember to mark fleets as retired in the reporting system if the vehicles have been sold or disposed of, rather than deleting the fleets. To retire a fleet, you should update the number of active vehicles to 0, after which you will see the question, is this fleet retired? For which you should select yes. Fleets should only be deleted if they were added to the form in error, or if you are removing a duplicate after using the add existing fleet function. The next form is the Service Vehicle Inventory A35 form. Agencies must report service vehicle fleets for which they have capital responsibility. Service vehicles include cars used for administrative staff, transit police cars, tow trucks, and service trucks. Because service vehicles must be roadworthy in order to be reported, agencies should not report small forklifts, golf carts, or any type of construction equipment that is not roadworthy. This form works in a similar manner as the A15 form. So to create a fleet, select Add New. Please ensure that you report revenue vehicles on the A30 form and service vehicles on the A35 form. In other words, you should not report vehicles on the A35 form if the vehicles are also used to transport passengers, since those vehicles should only be reported on the A30. You will report one A35 form per subrecipient agency. Report the service fleet information for this vehicle fleet. Select the vehicle type from a drop-down menu, which consists of 3 options: automobiles, trucks and other rubber tire vehicles, and steel wheel vehicles. Automobiles are passenger cars up to and including station wagons in size. If you have a service vehicle that is a minivan or anything larger, report them as trucks and other rubber tire vehicles. The estimated cost is the most recent estimate of the full cost to replace the fleet. If you do not have a recent estimate, you may report the original cost of the fleet or its insured value. And you must also report the year that corresponds to the dollar value you report. Save and validate the A35 form once you are finished. And again, if the agency does not have any reportable service vehicles, you should select the No Data to Report checkbox prior to saving the form. The Rural General Public Transit Reduced Reporting RR20 form contains an agency's financial, service, and resource data. When you open the RR20 form, the first 2 sections are total funds expended and funds expended by mode. The funds expended by mode section allows you to manually input the operating and capital expenses for each mode that the agency operates. In this example, this agency only reports the bus mode and reported an annual total of $150,000 in operating expenses and $75,000 in capital expenses. This is shown in the bottom set of red circles in the screenshot. Agencies must identify the different sources of funds that supported their transit system, which we will cover in the next few slides. But as you begin to report the funding sources, The system will automatically calculate a running total in the total funds expended section. In this example, the agency has finished reporting all of their funding sources, which totaled $150,000 in operations and $75,000 in capital. This is shown in the top set of red circles in the screenshot. The sum of your funding sources typically match what you enter as your total funds expended, as shown here. Agencies that operate more than one mode are required to capture and report actual expenses by mode and type of service. Agencies with more than one mode should determine which expenses are direct expenses and can be easily traced to a specific mode. Direct costs may include driver wages or vehicle repairs for specific modes. For the remaining joint or shared expenses, which are costs that are incurred for the benefit of more than one mode and cannot easily be traced, agencies may allocate those remaining costs. An example of shared costs may be a transit manager's salary that supports both the demand response and fixed route services. You may allocate shared costs by using an allocation factor, such as vehicle revenue miles, or unlinked passenger trips, or vehicle revenue hours, or number of employees per mode. The next section of the RR20, which begins the different funding source categories, is fare revenues. Fare revenues include all income received and expended directly from passengers. This section is broken down between passenger-paid fares and organization-paid fares. Passenger-paid fares are those that are traditionally considered as passenger fares, in which a rider pays to board the vehicle, and it includes full adult fares, senior citizen fares, student fares, child fares, and fares for individuals with disabilities. This section also includes donations that are made on board a vehicle in lieu of paying a fare. Organization-paid fares are those that an organization pays for or pays through a third party rather than the passenger. One common example of an organization-paid fare is a university paying a transit agency to allow students to ride fare-free. Funds expended from Medicaid for non-emergency medical transportation, or NEMT, should be reported as an organization-paid fare. If an agency reports more than one mode, they must capture and report the fares by mode and type of service. There are some exceptions to this requirement as listed here. And if a subrecipient's fare policy meets either of these criteria, please communicate that to your analyst during validation if needed. In most cases, however, fare revenues can be tracked for each mode and therefore should be reported as actual data and not allocated. The next funding source in the form is other directly generated funds, which are funds other than fares that an agency directly generates. Some common examples of other directly generated funds are advertising revenues, concession revenues, fundraisers, park and ride revenues, interest on investments, contract revenue for any non-full cost contracts, and donations and insurance recoveries. And when we say donations for this field, this refers to lump sum donations that may come from local charity foundations or private individual donors. This does not refer to donations that are made on board the vehicle, which we covered should be reported under fares. If you report funds to this field, a required text description box will appear. Revenues accrued through a purchased transportation or PT agreement should only be reported if a subrecipient receives revenues from another agency who pays the full cost of a transit service the subrecipient provides, as long as it meets the NTD definition of purchased transportation. It is not common for rural agencies to report funds to this field, so please discuss with your analyst before reporting new funds to this field. The next funding source category is non-federal funds. Enter the data based on what funds the agency expended from local funds, state funds, and other non-federal sources. Local sources include tax levies, general funds, and finances from local entities. State sources include state programs that support public transit, but do not include the Chapter 53 funds that your state DOT passes through to subrecipients, since Chapter 53 funds are federal in origin. If you report other funds, similar to other directly generated funds, a text description box will appear, so please ensure that you enter an accurate description of those funds. In the federal funds section, select all applicable federal funding sources from this list of programs. Once you select a box, the corresponding data entry fields will populate to the right. If you report funds to any other category, such as other federal funds or other FTA funds, you will be required to provide a text description to describe that funding program. Examples of other FTA funds include those not already listed in the RR20 form, such as Section 5308 FTA Clean Fuels Program. Examples of other federal funds include funds from a non-FTA or non-DOT federal grant not already listed in the form, such as Housing and Urban Development or HUD funds. Other US DOT funds will include funds that come from the Department of Transportation that are not FTA funds, such as funds from the Federal Highway Administration. The various COVID-19 relief programs, such as the CARES Act, CRISA Act, and American Rescue Plan Acts, are listed separately in the RR20 form. These programs provide emergency assistance and healthcare response for individuals, families, and businesses affected by the COVID-19 public health emergency. Please report funds expended from these programs to the appropriate field. After you complete the financial data section, complete the other resources section if it is applicable to this agency. Please report the number of volunteer drivers and/or the number of personal vehicles in service as applicable. Please note that you do not report personal vehicles on the A30 form as revenue vehicles. You should only report them in this section. If this section does not apply to this agency, please enter zeros into those data entry fields rather than leaving the fields blank. The next section in the form is annual service data. When reporting miles and hours, you should only include those miles and hours in which transit vehicles are operating in revenue service, which again is when the vehicles are transporting passengers or have the capacity to transport passengers. Unlinked passenger trips should reflect each instance in which a passenger boards a vehicle and should include personal care attendants who ride fare-free. Please note that while you report sponsored service unlinked passenger trips for certain modes in a separate data entry field, the total unlinked passenger trips should represent all ridership for the year, including regular and sponsored trips. In other words, you should not deduct sponsored UPT from the total UPT. Next, we will discuss the new Safety and Security SNS 60 form. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or BIL, requires the NTD to collect data related to assaults on transit workers. The statutory definition of assault on a transit worker is a circumstance in which an individual knowingly, without lawful authority or permission, and with intent to endanger the safety of any individual, or with a reckless disregard for the safety of human life, interferes with, disables, or incapacitates a transit worker while the transit worker is performing their duties. The requirement applies to reduced and rural reporters who already reported a summary of safety data to the NTD in previous years, but the requirement also applies to asset-only reporters who will begin reporting safety data in report year 2023. Assaults can be classified into two categories, physical and non-physical. Physical assaults involve physical contact with a transit worker and can include any contact with the attacker's body, a weapon, a projectile, or another item. Physical assaults can also include the assailant's saliva as well. Non-physical assaults do not involve any physical contact and can include threats, intimidation, or interfering with the worker's duties. The SNS 60 form will be available for rural general public transit subrecipients and asset-only subrecipients. The former safety data section in the RR20 form has been retired, so you will not see the old incidents, injuries, and fatalities fields in that form this year. Those fields have been moved to the SNS 60 form, where they've also been expanded to include more detailed data. The sections that RGPT subrecipients will complete are physical assaults, non-physical assaults, and all other reportable safety and security data. Asset-only subrecipients are only required to complete the sections for physical assault and non-physical assaults. They will not complete the sections for all other reportable safety and security data. Reportable events occur on transit right-of-way or infrastructure, at a transit revenue facility or maintenance facility, during a transit-related maintenance activity, or involving a transit revenue vehicle and meets a reporting threshold. For a safety event to be reportable, it must meet a reporting threshold, which include any of the following: a fatality confirmed within 30 days of the event, an injury requiring immediate medical attention away from the scene for one or more persons, property damage equal to or exceeding $25,000, collisions involving transit revenue vehicles that require towing away from the scene for either a transit vehicle or other non-transit vehicle, or an evacuation of a transit facility or vehicle for life safety reasons. You should exclude events that occur at bus stops or bus shelters that are not on transit-owned property, unless it involves boarding, alighting, or involving a transit vehicle. You should also exclude events that occur off transit property, where the affected persons come to rest on transit property after the event. Here's an overview of the pre-BIL and post-BIL reporting requirements and how safety data reporting will change starting in report year 2023. The key data elements now include assaults on transit workers. The reporting population has been expanded to include asset-only reporters. The reporting scope has not changed since the agency types listed above will continue to report safety data only on an annual basis. And finally, the collection timeframe is also consistent with previous years. Since the SNS 60 data is included in the annual report package, that's due 4 months following the state's fiscal year end. One key update to safety reporting is that agencies must report additional details regarding bus collision fatalities. Agencies previously reported these types of events, but only reported a count of injuries or a count of fatalities as general safety incidents. They did not specify whether the injury or fatality resulted from an impact with the bus. The SNS 60 form will provide fields for additional event types, including collisions with pedestrians, collisions with vehicles, or collisions with an other category, which can include things like an animal or a manhole. There's also a field for other major events, which are safety events that meet one of the reporting thresholds mentioned earlier, but are not specifically one of the collision types listed above. So for example, fires are one example of another major event type. So if there is a fire on transit property that results in an injury or property damage exceeding $25,000, you would report that here. And finally, there's a field where you will report injuries from non-major events. We encourage you to contact your analyst if you have any questions about any of these fields. Here is a screenshot of the SNS 60 form that depicts the physical assaults and non-physical assault sections. The columns represent the various location types where assaults may happen, the options being physical assaults in transit vehicle, physical assaults in revenue facility, physical assaults in non-revenue facility, and physical assaults in other location. The rows represent the total event counts for major safety and security events and non-major events. For all injuries and fatalities, you must report them based on the person type, including operators, other transit workers, and other. And the same rows and columns appear in the non-physical assaults table. Here's a screenshot of the bottom portion of the SNS 60 form, which includes all other reportable safety and security data. The columns may look familiar to you if you completed an NTD report in the past. Previously, we only collected a summary of event counts, fatality counts, and injury counts, but now you can report them based on the event types as listed on the left. Again, the types include collisions with pedestrians, collisions with vehicles, collisions with other, and other major events, which again are non-collision events that meet a reporting threshold. The last row represents total reportable injuries, which stem from non-major events. That was an overview of the report forms that will appear in subrecipient report packages. We will now review the state's report forms, starting with the statewide characteristics RU30 form. The RU30 is a summary form for statewide characteristics and will pre-populate the number of counties statewide. You should report the number of counties with 5311 service, which represents the total number of counties in the state that are served either in whole or in part by 5311 funded operators. You should include counties that are served by directly reporting Indian tribes. A county is considered to be served if an agency picks up or drops off passengers in that county. Next, report the total 5311 funds that were expended on state administration during the fiscal year. If this sum significantly changes from the value you reported last year, your analyst may ask about this during validation. Next, we will discuss the Transit Asset Management Performance Measure Targets, or A90 form. Agencies report the portion of their assets which have met or exceeded their useful life benchmark. The A90 form compares the current year targets to the live data that is pulled directly from the current year's asset forms. For the upcoming report year, this means the form will compare the 2023 performance targets, which were set in 2022, against the live data in the 2023 annual reports. For revenue and service vehicles, the system looks at the reported useful life benchmark and compares it to the year manufactured. For facilities, the system looks at the reported condition assessment per facility entry. State DOTs report on behalf of their managed and independent participants and completes a single A90 form that represents the whole group. The first section is the A90 rolling, the first section in the A90 rolling stock refers to the revenue vehicles reported on the participants' A30 forms. The performance measure refers to the percent of vehicles that have met or exceeded their useful life benchmarks. To complete this section, you should report the performance target for next year or 2024. The performance target refers to the percent of vehicles that you expect will have met or exceeded their useful life benchmarks by next year. The asset categories will populate based on participants' active modes, and you must only report one target per asset type. Select NA for any asset types that do not apply to your group TAM plan. Each row must either have a target reported or NA selected for the form to be considered complete. The second section is equipment, which refers to service vehicles reported on the participants' A35 forms. The performance measure and targets work the same way as they do for rolling stock. So again, you should report the target for 2024, which corresponds to the percentage of service vehicles in each category, that you expect will meet or exceed the useful life benchmarks by next year. And again, select NA for any asset types that do not apply. The third section is facility, which refers to the facilities you report on participants' A15 forms. This section calculates the performance measure based on the percentage of facilities that rate below a 3 on FTA's term scale, which ranges from 1 to 5. You should also upload your group TAM plan's narrative report at the bottom of the form. The narrative report outlines the targets you reported in the A90 form, the progress towards those targets, and any changes within the transit system's operating environments that may impact the targets. Your group TAM plan participants will see a read-only version of the group's A90 form. Once you have completed the reports for all subrecipients, completed the state forms, and addressed all open issues, you should submit the annual report package. To begin, open the state DOT report package and select the Related Actions tab. Then select Submit Annual Report Package. Please note that only state users with the CEO or CEO delegate role can submit the first draft of the annual report, which is referred to as the original submission. The user who holds the NTD contact role can submit all subsequent revisions once the report is returned. If the report has any open issues, the system will notify you when you attempt to submit the report. Open issues can include unaddressed validation issues, non-validated report forms, or incomplete required fields. So from this list, you can navigate directly to those forms to resolve the issues. If the report does not have any open issues, you can confirm the report package submission by selecting Continue, then Submit. When you successfully submit the report, you will see a dialog box that reads Action Completed Successfully. That was an overview of the report forms for a rural general public transit subrecipient. So next we will discuss some common reporting challenges agencies may face while completing the annual report. Reporting challenges can take shape in a variety of ways, including understanding the NTD policies, completing data entry correctly, and completing all required forms and fields in the report, as well as addressing validation issues. Analysts will send reports back with open issues if they have any follow-up questions regarding the report data. Validation includes, but is not limited to, time series checks against an agency's historical data, logic checks between data items on different forms, and checks for values that fall outside the typical industry range. To resolve validation issues, you can either revise the data if the data requires a correction, or provide a text explanation that addresses the issue. Another common reporting issue relates to allocating operating expenses. Reed covered this during his section, but just as a reminder, agencies may not allocate their total annual operating expenses. Rather, they must first determine which expenses are direct costs and attribute those costs to the appropriate mode, and agencies may then allocate the remaining shared costs to each mode and type of service afterwards. Another validation issue reporters may experience is reporting the appropriate funding sources for their service. Please ensure that your subrecipients report all funds that support their public transit service, rather than only reporting, for example, just the federal funding sources. Please also ensure that the subrecipients report the funding sources to the correct line items year over year, such as local funds, state funds, other directly generated funds, and 5311 federal funds. Agencies should only report service data for when they are performing revenue service. Revenue service does not include deadhead, therefore deadhead should not be included in the data that's reported to the NTD. Deadhead is when transit vehicles are operating closed door and do not carry passengers. This can include leaving or returning to the garage or heading to or from the starting or ending points of revenue service. This can also include changing routes or any time when the driver does not have the duty to carry passengers. Vehicle revenue miles is an apportionment formula factor for 5311 funds, so this data is validated closely. When reporting vehicles operated in maximum service or VOMs, agencies might erroneously report 100% of their active vehicle inventory as their VOMs. Agencies may retain spare vehicles that do not necessarily operate during peak service times, so VOMs are typically lower than the total number of active vehicles. If the VOMs you report on the RR20 form is either equal or higher than the number of active vehicles you report on the A30 form, your analyst may ask about this during validation. When reporting a new vehicle, it's typical that an agency will report the corresponding capital expense on the RR20. One validation issue that comes up is that agencies will either report the new vehicles on the A30 form or the capital expenses on the RR20 form, but not both. Additionally, please note that when you report capital expenses for a vehicle that is used for more than one mode, you must report the full expense to the predominant mode that uses the vehicle the most, rather than splitting the capital vehicle cost between modes. Agencies must inventory the vehicles that they use to provide public transit service on the A30 form if the vehicles have not been sold or disposed of at the end of the fiscal year. The inventory should represent a snapshot of the last day of the fiscal year, and new vehicles must be reported in the first fiscal year when they become available for service. Regarding the A90 form, agencies must report the next fiscal year's performance targets for assets for which they have capital replacement responsibility. One reporting issue may be that an agency reports the current year's target rather than the next year's target. For report year 2023, you should report the target for 2024. Another issue may be reporting a target that does not seem statistically realistic, so your analyst may ask about any targets that do not appear consistent with the current asset inventory. Subrecipient management is very important for state DOT reports, as the subrecipient list provides a picture of transit operators who receive federal program funds from the state. So as a reminder, you can add or remove subrecipients for the year by navigating to the state's report package and then selecting related actions, followed by manage subrecipients. Some common reporting challenges here can include removing urban or tribal subrecipients because they report directly to the NTD. If these agencies receive 5311 funds from the state, you should submit abbreviated subrecipient packages for those agencies. We're coming up on the last few minutes here. We have just a couple of slides left. I'll be sure to cover this information as efficiently as I can. So once you submit the report, there are a couple more steps that must be taken in order to completely close out the report for the year. Your analyst will review the entire report for accuracy and consistency. They will compare the data in this year's report to the data submitted in last year's report to look for any significant changes, ensure that all forms have been completed, and check to see that the data has been reported to the correct fields. If your analyst asks about any changes from last year, please avoid providing generalized responses such as the data is correct, since these responses typically don't offer a clear explanation for why the data changed. The more information you can provide early in the reporting process, you can help reduce the number of report turnovers before closeout. Once your analyst has reviewed the report, they'll return it to the state to resolve the open validation issues. As the report revision count increases, the revision time period decreases, since the report should have fewer and fewer issues with each submission. Be sure to address any items that were cited in last year's closeout letter. If you fail to correct any issues that were stated in the letter, that data may be marked as questionable in report year 2023. Notes in the closeout letter will typically relate to incomplete reports, which could mean the data does not conform with NTD definitions or accounting principles, or it could mean that the agency did not adequately respond to validation issues raised by the analyst. If you respond to a validation issue and notice that your analyst has kept the issue open with a follow-up question, please avoid copying and pasting your original response as your follow-up response. And please also avoid copying and pasting the same response for multiple checks if the checks are asking about different service characteristics. All issues must be fully addressed for it to be considered resolved. And if any of these issues occur, FTA may cite them in the closeout letter. The best way to resolve issues is to provide thorough and detailed explanations that give your analyst a clear picture of the agency's transit service. So explain why the data changed from year to year, or what service changes took place to cause a decrease or increase from last year. If you find that last year's data was incorrect, please provide the correct value if you have it, or explain why it was wrong or why this year's data is correct. Just please note that FTA does not accept this response for multiple report years. All right, and with just about a minute to spare, here is the contact information for our team, as well as the NTD Help Desk, which is open Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you all again for attending this afternoon. We hope this session was helpful to you in preparing for this report year. And I will now turn it back over to Lori to close us out.